Well, we do not get together for emergency pods for good news at all. That is not the life that we live. I'm Derek, joined by Kyle Newbeck on the PHLY Sixers show to discuss the news that Joel Embiid has been ruled out for the remainder of the season. How you doing, Kyle?
Well, Derek, I just want to point out we do react to good news, but then in hindsight, it becomes bad news. It's like, oh, yay, they signed Paul George. That's fun. And then
Remember the Caleb
6 months
Martin
go
one?
by, and all of a sudden it's
Yeah.
like, boy, remember when there was some excitement about that? So I'm doing okay.
In a minute.
I am, as I'm sure you are, you're bummed out for Joel, bummed out for this season that the team has had, bummed out on a lot of different levels. But I think this is what we were both expecting. Certainly what Devon was also expecting, that at some point that just, everything was adding up to there's just no way you can put that guy on the floor anymore.
Yeah. No, we did a show 24 hours ago, right about talking about, the way that he looked, talking about Kyle, his article, which go to allphly.com to check it out. His article on the sort of options the Sixers had in front of him. I had an article on sort of like how he's looked different and why this isn't the Joel Embiid that we have come to know and love. And it is, I think certainly we all sort of agreed that it looked like it was trending in that direction. I think a little surprised that, so I guess the statement that they released, Philadelphia 76ers and Joel Embiid have been consulting with top specialists regarding ongoing issues with his left knee. After further evaluation, it has been determined that he is medically unable to play and will miss the remainder of the season to focus on treatment and rehabilitation. They then said that we are working with medical professionals or medical experts to determine the exact treatment plan and will update media when we have more information. So I think two things are interesting. First, they just ruled him out, full stop, season's over. No ambiguous, like we'll reevaluate in 2 weeks. There'll be further updates. Just he's done for the season. And also that there is not a treatment plan to announce at this time, which, it's on the one hand, I think it's good that he's rolled out. I think at this point, we all just need a little bit of, I don't even want to say certainty because without treatment, you don't know certainty, but at least we all have our expectations set. The team has their expectations set. They can proceed accordingly. But it does feel like we're waiting on the next major news dump, which who knows when that will be. That could be in days, that could be in weeks.
It'll be at
And
5 p.m. on a Friday, 3
Well, it'll
hours after
definitely
we
be
were at the
5 PM
practice
on a
facility,
Friday,
just like
yes.
it happened today.
But we are still waiting on some news, on how they will look to address the issue.
Yeah. So two main things jump out of it. I mean, the lack of ambiguity is good right now in the short term, right? Or we spent a whole show saying, I think when you look at how he has carried himself mentally and like the body language suggesting he was frustrated with himself and his inability to be the Joel Embiid that we've seen in the past, that he knows that he can be, that there's no sense throwing him out there in compromised form and allowing that to just create this negative feedback loop and doom spiral and crater whatever confidence and ability and all that he has left. So I think from that perspective, making this certain, ruling him out for the year is helpful for him. And frankly, it's probably helpful for a lot of the guys in the locker room who are just like, what do we do with all this, right? Like, we just have no idea what's going to happen day to day, game to game, week to week. And so this allows them, at least for anybody who still has illusions that they're competing, they at least have a little bit of certainty. But I would say that the fact that it has been this long and they're still at the point where it's like, well, we don't really know what we're going to do, or that hasn't been chosen yet, is not the greatest sign in the world to me. It does highlight what we've talked about this week and we've written about, where a lot of the options are experimental. A lot of the options are not, and I would say all the options, at least that I'm aware of, are not clear-cut fixes. They are mitigation tools. They're attempts to work around the problem that exists. So this is not a situation where I see like, oh, he's getting this procedure and then he's out for 4 months and then he starts rehab and then he's back on the floor and he looks like Joel Embiid. Like, honestly, my first thought reading what they sent out and just sort of processing this over the last, let's say, week or so, week and a half or so that he's been out and they've been looking at options, is that this era is just kind of over, right? Like that's where your mind goes, where you look back and you say, we're going to be talking about the missed opportunities, right? The 2019 season, the Kawhi shot in Toronto. We're talking about 2021 when you play a worse Atlanta team, you're the number one seed with home court, and you lose in pretty embarrassing fashion and blew that opportunity. You go back to 2023, you win game 5 in Boston, can't hit anything, game 6 at home, and then you have a humiliating game 7 loss in Boston to the Celtics to end your season. And I just I don't see how it goes up from here with him as the guy, with him as the lead of the team, right? Now maybe you can, if you tank hard enough and you get somebody high level in the draft, man, if you get number 1 and get Cooper Flag and you can start really building a young core, like sure, we'll talk about excitement and what they're building and how guys pair with Maxey and McCain and so on. But as far as like this team has championship equity, this team has a chance to win a title with Joel Embiid as the guy. To me, this just kind of spells out in neon letters like it's just kind of over.
Yeah, it's certainly like you are not going to rely on him being here. You're not going to expect him to get back anywhere close to where he was. I'm never going to say never. I'm never going to completely close the door until Joel Embiid retires. There will always be a tiny, minuscule chance that he can come back and be an impact player. I don't know exactly how to guesstimate that. I don't know how to put odds on that back. It does not feel great. And I'm not going to sit up here and tell you it should feel great. We've all gone over the procedures. We all know how either experimental or unproven or just it seems like Hail Mary attempts they truly are. If there was a clear cut course of action, because there's a lot of people every time we tweet an injury report in our replies, have him get the surgery. If there was the surgery, they would be announcing that right now. They wouldn't be taking more time to try to figure out where to go. The fact that it is so uncertain and that there's nothing clear cut, no clear cut direction to go is why you're sort of getting this two-part announcement. One, he's done for the season, but we still don't really know the path forward. So yeah, I mean, look, is there a chance that he could regain something and be a second or third option or maybe a part-time player? I'm sure he's going to try. I certainly don't want to say that his career is over, his time as an impact player is over, but it is as dark as it has ever been. And you shouldn't really have confidence in anything going forward.
No, I mean, until we see confidence from Joel in the knee and in himself on the floor, there's no real reason to have confidence in him, right? And it's not criticism of him, right? I think we've
Yeah.
been clear, like we all are very sympathetic for what he's going through and have been advocates for him to say, just shut this down. And maybe that goes against the medical advice that you and I have broadly heard, Derek, is like, the best thing for him is to try to get out there as much as possible, to try to acclimate to what the reality of his knee is. But even as we say that, you and I have eyes. We watch these games, and we've grown used to a certain Joel Embiid, like being able to do specific things, right? To drive past guys from the nail, to rotate in on defense and protect the rim, and play out on switches and do all these things. And he can't, he won't. And if that doesn't change, even if it does, right? Like we saw flashes this year. He had halves and he had stretches where he looked really, really good. Maybe not the same Joel Embiid as before, but he comes back from an absence and has what, a 29-point triple double against Dallas. He had a half against the Chicago Bulls earlier in the year where I think he had 20 plus points and a half. And it's like, oh, maybe this guy just needs to get his legs under him. Maybe it'll come at some point. The team chemistry will come around, and it just never did. And the deeper we got, the more you could hear and see him just wearing down under the pressure of the season, under the pain he's feeling, the swelling he's dealing with, all that. Like it just was not just him. This whole team has just had one thing after another thrown at them this year, and so the only hope you would say is you come back, clean slate, whatever it ends up being, however long the recovery period is, the rehab period is, you get to wipe this season away and say it's another opportunity. And that's really the only thing you can hold on to right now.
Yeah. No, and certainly, like, we've talked a lot about whether or not playing basketball is a way to get the knee and the surrounding tissues and mushu tissues and muscle up to where they need to be, to where maybe some of those symptoms will not be as severe. But it's just like watching him play, like you said, and watching how different he was and how lack of confidence he had and how it became a mental aspect as well as a physical aspect. There just has to be a way to simulate that or do conditioning or strengthening drills that aren't in front of the entire world. And even if there's no like clear cut surgery, having a summer to really focus on not just resting it, but now rehabbing it, maybe it will put him in a better spot than he was to start this season. Look, anything we say here, any kind of projection forward, we might have hopes and dreams, but it feels like that's what we're resting on. It does feel like at this point, when you've got Tyrese with the bad pinky, you've got Paul with the torn tendon in the pinky. Like, we have got to be approaching shut it down territory. Like, this to me signals the fact there's no timeline. If there isn't like further steps to make sure that Paul is healthy, it feels like that should be the next step.
Yeah. Now, again, all of this always rests on what do those guys want to do or what can you convince them to do, right? Because we can sit here and say there are reasons to shut them down, but I think Tyrese specifically will be the interesting one because I think he's a guy who will be tougher to look in the eye and say, hey, we don't want you to play the rest of the year. In
And
fact,
his injury is less severe too.
yeah, and Nick Nurse actually said at practice today he didn't think it was a problem with his hand that was going to get worse the rest of the year. Now, famous last words, right? We've heard a lot of medical assertions from this team and that head coach all year that haven't turned out too well for the Sixers. So I think it certainly seems like it should be the first domino and that this sets them up to say, we are truly packing it in for these final 24 games and just saying, we're doing everything we can to keep that pick. Obviously, Derek, you now have your daily updates about who's playing that's in the tanking race at the bottom, and we're way more invested than we thought we would be in the draft lottery coming into the year. I have a question for you as the CBA guy. Do you read anything into how they frame this within the press release for future reasons, whether that's long-term injury replacement rules in the CBA, or even if it gets to the point of like a medical retirement eventually?
Yeah. So if he retires, just I'm done with basketball, he forfeits his money. Players, this might come as a shock to you. Players do not frequently do that. If he is physically unable to continue playing, then after 12 months since his last game, so like let's say theoretically this was last time he played basketball, in 12 months, not quite 12 months because it's a couple weeks into it, but 12 months from his last game, the Sixers could apply to basically have his contract removed from the team salary and the cap. You're not going to get any kind of exception in there. You're not going to get like a trade exception or something you can use to sign players, but his contract will no longer count against the books. In order to do that, those two things crucially would have to happen. First, Joel would have to not want to play basketball anymore. And we haven't necessarily gotten any kind of signs of that. And it certainly wouldn't surprise me if he still wants to try to go out there and perform and cement his legacy and try to win at a level that he hasn't been able to. It would not surprise me at all. But then there would be an independent medical staff or panel. I forget exactly how it works, but an independent panel of doctors would then have to evaluate him and say, yes, he is unable to physically play basketball anymore. So it's not just like by setting this press release out there that they're laying the groundwork for that, because you would have to first get Joel Embiid to say, yes, I want to retire from basketball, and B, get medical opinions to agree that he is no longer capable of playing basketball.
And that's why I ask you these questions, so I don't have to read all that stuff because it's Friday. And
it's so freaking depressing that we are at this stage.
It really is, and like there are just so many people that I really feel for. I mean, first and foremost, Joel, right? Like that's the most important one. Is just like he has been through so much with the knee and all the other things that like you don't want to have a player that and you cover it's just a roller coaster, right? He can't get right for whatever reason. His body betrays him, so it's him. You feel for his teammates who are, are just kind of like along for the ride with all this. You feel for the fans who are hoping to see this guy play, and they buy season tickets. And oh, by the way, pretty sure season ticket renewals are like going out now or in the days ahead, and so people are making decisions for the future based on this information. And it's like there's so many people who are impacted by one guy's troublesome knee. When you think about it, it's like other people in the front office, coaching staff could lose their jobs because they made this big bet on Joel. And like, we have been, I would say, pretty pro Joel generally, right? Over the years, like his talent and his production and everything he's done. And then they made this bet on him and they extended him. Now that he still would have been on the team this year regardless, but they made a longer term bet on this guy. And in the short term, it has looked about as bad as it could possibly go given the expectations. So there are a lot of potential ramifications that could come from this. We're only scratching the surface on where this goes.
Yeah. Nope. Gave out 3 max contracts last year and not great so far. One of them, Tyrese. I hate it to Tyrese.
Yeah, it looks okay. The other 2, not so much.
No, and look, this is a down emergency episode. I don't know how it could not be. I will sit here and hope that all of the pessimism and doom and gloom, not really from us, because I think we try to keep it a little bit down the middle, but from the fans is misplaced. I will root for him to be able to get his basketball life back on track because I think it's best for him. I think it's a key thing and best for you guys. And I hope that any pessimism is wrong, but reacting in the moment, it really is. I mean, this is as down of a year and sad of a time as it can get. Where do you think do you think there's a shutdown coming for anyone else? Like, do you think that they could actually take the next steps in securing? Because there's so much that goes into tanking. Like, right, there's a coaching staff that wants to keep their jobs. There's a front office that who knows. There's been a lot of scuttlebutt over whether or not Daryl is fully secure. There's players who are competitive. They're still only 2.5, 3 games out of the 10th seed. Which look, it's preposterous for me to say that, but that doesn't mean it's not what the team is thinking. So is there an actual chance that they will push forward in the tank?
I think if you're everybody else, shutting Joel down kind of just covers everything, right? Because if you're the coaching staff, you could say, well, there's nothing that the team is playing for at this point, right? You're playing to compete every night, but in terms of like actually being able to go out and win a playoff series or win multiple playoff series, not that that was realistic with this version of Joel, but all that rested on you needed to have him in some shape or form. And so any illusions about that you're selling the team on, hey, just wait until this guy gets back. Just wait until we have everybody available.
Cleveland Cavaliers are not scared of the Sixers without Joel Embiid.
No. So all that goes out the window. Now, the tough part to say, and I don't have a good feel for this right now, is like if or how this impacts ownership's view of the season and sort of like what would be expected from them in this final stretch of 24 games, right? Because I do think there is pressure on both the coaching staff and the front office right now. Maybe they both end up being retained. Maybe neither ends up being retained. But like, I think it would be naive to say this is the most disappointing Sixer season in decades and nobody's job is on the line, right? And so I don't know how Harris and Edelman and everybody else in the ownership group is going to evaluate this necessarily. But I do think that like everybody who's left is going to have to do something to show like I can be a force for change next year. And that doesn't apply to Maxey. He's good. It doesn't apply to Paul, who I think he would be the more likely guy if they shut someone down. I think it'd be the 34-year-old vet who's got the outstanding hand problem. Probably easier to sell him.
I think he's just dangling there.
Yeah, season's over, whatever. But aside from that, I think everyone else has got to be looking around and saying, I got to prove myself in this next month and a half, couple of months before some real hard decisions would need to be made.
Yeah. My request, I only have 2 requests. One, you've got to cap Tyrese's minutes at like 36 to 38. No more 40 minutes, no more averaging 38. Like just cut them down. Give me the 34 to 36 range, put a hard cap at like 38. You don't need to run him into the ground. If he wants to play, great. If you want to, you know, act like you're running for a playoff seed, fine. Just don't be reckless about it. And the reckless part then comes in to Paul George. Shut him down. Let that pinky heal. Don't put it at any more risk of re-aggravation. And let him build his confidence back up by not playing in these games where he's clearly limited by it. So yeah, I think it's probably unrealistic for them to actually prioritize losing basketball games, even though it's best for the franchise. And I think we're all on that boat at this point anyway. I think that's unrealistic, but I think it is reasonable to be like, all right, but take a long-term view, worry more about the healthier players, and just don't be reckless about it.
Yeah, and like there are some very little things you can accomplish, right? Like you can get Justin Edwards a ton of minutes, you can get a Dembona lots of time, you can see what Yabu's got in terms of the dual front court stuff the rest of the year, but this is certainly not what everyone was signed up for this year, right? Like people came into the year with contention expectations with, hey, this team's going to be a top 3 seed and win 50 plus games and be in the hunt, just like they've been many times in recent seasons, right? Even if they only ever got to the second round. So it's a big, big pivot that's brought on by this, but you have no other choice, right? They are painted into this corner. The season didn't go how you wanted it to. You can cry about it, or you can try to make the best of it. And the best of it right now is holding on to that potential draft pick for dear life, right? Just doing absolutely everything you can to try to get another young talent in here, because otherwise nothing else really matters the rest of this year.
19 games played, 23.8 points. Just not what anyone was expecting. He was averaging 36 and 11 before he was injured last January. It will remain one of the great, going back and looking at that play and looking at that sequence, will be one of the real, inflection points of the franchise and its history. And it's just a darn shame. It is something where, I know we say it a lot, but he gets a lot of anger because he's been injured so much. And certainly there's other parts of his personality, his leadership, his game that you can be angry about. But he gets a lot of anger from fans and whatnot from being injured. I do feel for him because this one sucks. It, for the most part, wasn't his doing at all. Jonathan Kuminga landed on his knee, and he's never been the same since. It does sort of make the performance against the Knicks last spring a little more impressive, quite frankly, that he was able to battle through it and have a 50-point game in the playoffs against a really good team. Wasn't enough to win the series, but he has clearly just never been the same. And it was, say what you want about Joel, but up until that point, he was improving as a basketball player pretty much every year. And he was having his best offensive season up to that point. It was obviously only the regular season. He had to do it in the playoffs, yada, yada, yada. But he was still clearly in his prime, and it just got ripped away from him.
Yeah, it's a real shame. And especially because where he has topped out in the playoffs, his career up to this point, and certainly with the way that it's headed, we're likely heading into a lot of like just what if discussions in the future, right? It's not what this guy accomplished and what he was able to do. And like he has this wonderful story, right? Like this kid who was discovered in Africa at a camp and brought over to the States, and he barely knows how to play. There's the video of him in high school jumping past the backboard without realizing he was there. And then all of a sudden he's on a team with Andrew Wiggins, the #1 overall recruit, and becomes prior to the injury, a more coveted prospect than he was, and then becomes an MVP, and he's in, all defense conversations and yada, 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 yada. And now it's just all going to get boiled down to, well, he didn't get it done in the playoffs, and he hasn't. Like, don't have to lie about it, but that'll be his story, right? That health never allowed him to reach maybe what he could have been without the health issues. And when he had his shots in the playoffs, he didn't get it done for whatever reason. And so that, up to this point, is his story. And that sucks, but at least he's got a big contract coming to him. That's the only solace I come back to, is he'll have to be the what if guy for a long time, but he certainly he's had an interesting journey, and I hope one day he's able to appreciate it at the very least.
Yep. And hopefully, to Marcus Blackstock's comment, hopefully this is not an obituary and just a really sad day in the history of this podcast and the history of the city. But I guess we'll find out. Just like I said, hope that all of this is the tone on this is wildly off and that we were too pessimistic. But it's hard not to be. All right. Anything else you think should be brought up during this?
No, I mean, look, we'll probably have more when there's actually determination made on what they're going to do. If this does become hey, he's getting XYZ procedure, we can elaborate on that a little bit. I think we do want to probably at some point have a actual medical expert come on the show and talk us through some of these things. So it's not Derek and I and Devon doing WebMD type doctoring on here and going through medical journals and whatnot. But yeah, aside from that, it's just, you got to hope for the guy, right? That's all you can do. It's just wild to think that a guy who a year and a few months ago was having the most dominant stretch of basketball, maybe of his career, was only able to suit up for like 6 wins this season. Like, that's a crazy thing to think about.
Crazy. Only 19 games. And look, I guess I'll try to end this, force myself some forced positivity. The great thing about sports is that there's all kinds of events that are completely improbable and shape our experience as fans, shape the legacy of players, shape the history of the teams and the franchises. And certainly, like, this would be an improbable, him getting back to the point where he is, forget MVP, forget 36, but like a dominant player again. Him getting that point feels almost impossible at this point. Doesn't mean it is impossible. And like Kyle has mentioned, we are not doctors, so we are not even qualified to say whether it is. But it feels like the odds are stacked against him, and that is what makes the best stories in all of sports. So maybe it's improbable. Maybe it feels impossible at this time. It is not, and I guess that is what we will cling to. Hopefully a great story to tell in the coming.
As your cat does a nice pose behind you, by the way.
Climbing all over me, literally all over me.
But I'm with you, Derek, and I would add this, right? The Eagles didn't win a Super Bowl for the entirety of their existence. And then the first one they win is when the star franchise quarterback falls apart and Nick Foles comes in and leads them on a heroic run. Like, that is the beauty of sports, right? Like, you don't know. You line it up and you play. And all the on paper, all the what we think, all the what we project, all the things people say, it all just is dust in the wind, right? So I hope that the road here, with all the injuries, all the heartbreak, all the other things, that this ends up for Joel being something that he points to later on and says, those are the trials I had to go through to eventually get to the mountaintop. So even if it doesn't feel good today, even if I'm not ultra optimistic right now, I hope for his sake that at the very least he's able to come back and be something resembling the guy that he used to be, because that guy we watched this year is not the Joel I know or
The dark forest in fairy tales does not start in the beginning of the story or at the end. It's always smack dab in the middle. Hopefully this is just our dark forest. Do you want to do a roll call or?
Nah, no roll calls today. But I appreciate. Listen, our people showed up for us in force at a moment's notice and came here because they're feeling a lot of the same feelings you and I are talking out here, right? So
yeah,
I want everybody to know, each and every one of you, we appreciate you showing up for us, just like you show up for Joel. And whether he gets right, or whether this is Maxie's team, or whether this is Jared McCain and Cooper Flagg's team over the long term, we will be here. We will be talking about it. We'll be analyzing it. And you just wait and see, and you try to have a little fun.
And I can promise more cat cameos as well.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you, Kyle, for jumping on such short notice. Thank all of you guys for showing up to have a little bit more of collective therapy. And we have tomorrow night, before and after the Warriors game. I don't know if you noticed, but they're playing pretty good basketball right now. So we will talk to you guys soon. And thanks again.
We all city like the mayor.